Good evening, everyone. My name is Sarah Webb. I am the Community Engagement Librarian with the Clark County Public Library. And I want to welcome you all this evening to our first ever local author spotlight featuring Kevin Creager. It started.
It's this picture here.
There he is. Before we get started, I want to introduce the program's creator and host, Nancy Fishbaugh. Nancy is a local author who writes as a spiritual practice. She now has 5 books published. We'll be featuring her 2022 release titled Revelation in the Roots Aisle in next month's Spotlight. Check out more about Nancy on her websites at nancyflinchball.com and spiritualseedlings.com. So without further ado, I'll let Nancy take it over.
This is one of Nancy's books.
And this is Kevin's book, Time Out. Well, thank you all for joining us. I know a lot of you are here tonight to celebrate Kevin and his amazing work as an author. And what we're going to do tonight is we're going to start with a little introduction to Kevin and his books. And after that, Kevin's going to read from his most recent book, which is Time Out. And then after that, we'll have some time to talk with Kevin. And so what you might do is write down your questions and be ready. And then at the end, Sarah's going to fill you in on our next program, and also a book club opportunity, which is really cool. The library is going to, or maybe already has, 6 copies of Kevin's book. And we're going to have a book club on March 8th to talk with Kevin specifically about the book. Now, maybe some of you have already read it and want to talk a little bit about it tonight. That's great too, but you'll have an opportunity later to have a book club with Kevin. So now I'm going to ask Steve to go ahead and start. We have pre-recorded the introduction and interview. Kevin and I did this last week or week before. So Steve, if you can start the introduction and interview. If everybody could please mute themselves, that would be great. Hi, this is Nancy Flinchball with spiritualseedlings.com. And today I'm hosting a local author spotlight with the Clark County Public Library in Springfield, Ohio. Today we're interviewing Kevin Creager, one of our up-and-coming local authors. Kevin is a retired school psychologist and has been very busy in retirement writing 3 books. He's active in the Springfield Toastmasters Club and also the Springfield Writers Club. He tells me his mother was a writer and his father was an actor, and so he's kind of joining some of their loves later in life in retirement. He also wants you to know he's married to a wonderful woman, Sue Creager, and together they have 3 children who are all married and 3 wonderful in-laws, not outlaws, and 4 grandchildren. He's also written each of his grandchildren their personal Christmas story, featuring them as an elf. Kevin's first book was called Wecuss a Little, The Life and Times of a School Psychologist. He wrote this book to fill a needed gap, to provide stories about experiences of being a school psychologist. He assures me there's no cussing in the book, but that was actually something a parent told him about their home life. His second book, The Body on the Roof, is a small town mystery. He had a dream one time about somebody finding a body on the roof. And so he started to write this book to find out what happened. Why was that body up on the roof? His third book that we want to feature today, it just came out in late 2021, is Time Out. In this book, a young man goes back in time 6 years thinking, if I knew then what I know now, life would be so much better. It didn't quite work out the way he thought, but you'll enjoy reading his journey. What I have to say about the book is, journey back in time with this imaginative read full of laughter and the unexpected on every page. And Jim Arter has said, Wally Stevens, through the wonder of a time-traveling chair, is faced with quirky professors, a schizophrenic landlady, and not one but two women who may be interested in him, and your obligatory bad guys. You might want to take a time out to ensure you have enough time to enjoy this. Well, welcome to a book club interview with Kevin Creager, the author of Time Out. And today we just want to meet Kevin a little bit and find out about how he became a writer. So let's start with that right away, Kevin. How did you become an author?
I had written some stories for my children, and I liked the idea of just writing a story to share with them. When I retired for the first time from the Springfield City Schools, after 2 months, my wife said I needed to go back to work. And I decided at that point, let me go back part-time and then spend the other part-time of the week writing. So I told her to think of me as still working full-time. That didn't always work, but that gave me time on the days that I wasn't in being a school psych to actually, those are my days dedicated to writing.
So we have Sue to thank for this, your wife, for getting
We're
you.
actually getting to the point of publishing books, yes.
And you devoted a lot of time initially to do that, and half of your time was going to be book writing. So tell me about this new book, Time Out. It's about time travel. What motivated you to write a book about time travel?
Well, as I mentioned before, I believe everybody at some point in their life has the thought, well, if I only knew then what I know now, I would be so much better able to handle that situation. I would have so much more maturity in going about it. So I wanted to write a book where somebody has that thought and has the opportunity to actually go back a little bit in time, only 6 years,
Was
to
it very,
try and
okay.
figure if that works.
Was that challenging? Is it hard to write a book about time travel?
Well, there are two things that people talk about when they talk about time travel that you have to address. One is, how do you actually do it? Which I sort of, in my book, it just sort of happens. Nobody explains it. Nobody really knows. There's this chair. You sit in the chair, you press a switch, and you go back to a certain time. So didn't want to spend a lot of time on that. Didn't want a lot of people going, well, that wouldn't work. And the other issue that frequently comes up is, but you might change things back there. And I have always thought, even on the other time travel books that I've read and the movies, if you actually travel back in time, you're there now. You are part of that time.
Yeah.
You're not actually creating anything new. You had to have been there if you actually traveled back in time. So that's how I deal with that issue, is basically you're already there. Whatever you do is what happens.
Okay. Yeah. So it still could be different than what it would have been if you hadn't been there, right? Or not?
Well, but you were there.
Yeah. Okay.
If you traveled back, you were there.
I thought your book was very funny, and you wrote a lot of humor into most of the scenes. And I just wondered, how did you think? And you're also obviously a very creative person. So I just wondered, how do you pick all this up and make all those funny twists?
Well, my point in writing this in the first place actually was for it to be funny. So I'm glad you thought it was funny. I appreciate that. It wasn't until probably a third, halfway through the book that another storyline popped up to me. I didn't have that idea when I first started writing the book, but I thought, okay, I need to be doing something more here. And also, this is where the characters took me. I have these characters, and this is what's going on, and it seems as if there should be a mystery involved with that. And that's
So you had written another mystery, so maybe that was kind of in your genre to add the mystery part in there. Possibly.
And that probably is. I wanted something that Wally, the protagonist, had to figure out. But being funny was really my goal in doing this, so I was willing to be silly and see what happened with it.
No, well, you did a great job with being funny and creative, I think. Why would you recommend somebody might want to read your book?
For the humor and as entertainment. Wasn't intended to be, as a friend of mine used to say, heavy, deep, and real. This was not supposed to. I think there are a couple things you can take from it. Is basically the idea that, I can't go back and change what's going on in my life,
Mhm.
and I just have to sort of go ahead with that. And even if I had that opportunity to do it, would I really want to? That's going to be, don't have any regrets. Just go
Yeah.
ahead with the way your life is going
So
now.
maybe that's the school psychologist coming out in you there a little
That could
bit. We have to just celebrate what has been and move on. Yeah. So a lot of people might like to write a book, but never have actually accomplished it. But you've done it 3 times now. How did you manage to finish 3 books?
Well, I've got a lot of more ideas here. These are all pages of different ideas for things going on, and that's
Well,
the first book. We Cuss a Little,
mhm,
and that title was based on a parent's response to a question that was asked, "What is the language spoken most often in the home?" And I just thought that told me so much more about the home than if she just said English. So I thought that was actually an important title for
mhm,
that. But that book, as you'd said earlier, I hadn't seen any books out there that said this is how things actually happen. Most of the books were how-to books and giving you lists of things that you needed to keep track of as a school psychologist.
mhm,
And this one just tells stories. And I think it's still popular now because, for one thing, it's cheaper than the textbooks that the graduate students have to buy.
mhm,
But I think it's also an easier read, and I think it gives them a flavor of just really what happens and what you can do.
mhm.
That it's not just a matter of you going in and this is what the school psychologist role is. You can actually expand it. That's the second book. Was a dream that I had, The Body on the Roof. And basically, I wanted to find out how the body got there. And that's why I wrote the book to get to that point. And this book was just the idea that I had had from, if I knew then what I know now, what would be different. And I wanted to write something funny.
Mhm.
But to get all the way through it, you sort of just have to give yourself time to do it and to get into that world. My wife has the problem where sometimes she has come into the room and wanted to tell me something, and I had to look at her and say, "You seem to think that I am actually listening to you, but I'm not. I'm in this other world right now."
So just having a place you can go to have total focus and have some respect for your space. And do you write it at the same time every day, or do you write different times?
Well, it's not every day. I'm better in the morning. I
Mhm.
think I'm able to actually focus more in the morning and to create some time for myself to do that. That's on the first couple books. I would have a goal of so many pages or so many words to write. Since I now have a few books out, I haven't really set those types of goals for myself. That's right now I'm 3/4 of the way through a short story and can't seem to quite get to the point of finishing. I know where I want to go, but I just need to get down and have the time and just get it done.
So your new book is called Short Story?
No, this is actually just a short story called
Oh,
Guardian Angels. But I've my new works that I'm doing sort of on now. There's a lot of things in progress that I actually have, and it sort of depends upon the mood or just how I'm being inspired at the time. I've written quite a few short stories over the years, many for the kids, but also ghost stories and some Twilight Zone type things. and I'd sort of like to put those together in a book. We've taken some trips, like going on cruises on the Rhine River around Italy or to Alaska, and I've written up our trips, sort of as a narrative for when my wife is doing her scrapbooking. But that's to sort of put those together in a book on travel. And again, it's more lighthearted, and it's not saying, okay, this is the history of the place that we were going to. It's just more, okay, this is the experience of what we did when we were there. And that's, I've got 2 other novels sort of started, actually 3, but not very far into those yet.
Well, we'll have to check back with you in a year or so and see what's happened. It sounds like you're doing a lot. So how can people contact you if they'd like to talk with you or invite you to speak or buy your books?
Well, the email, which is Kevin Creager at sbcglobal.net. The books are available on Amazon and Barnes and Noble, and I think Books and Company, and probably any of the bigger book websites. But that's if you want a signed copy, you'd actually have to contact me. My number is 937-631-7210.
Okay, well, thank you very much, Kevin. It's been great talking with you today. And thank you for your creative books that are making the world a brighter place.
Well, thank you for the opportunity to be here, Nancy. I really appreciate it.
If you'd like to. Okay. There was a little bit, Steve, you missed the last slide that would have explained how, but I think basically he shared that information. So now we're going to hear Kevin read from his book Time Out. It's a 5-minute reading, and then we'll have a chance to talk with Kevin. So I'll give you a little taste for the time travel mystery. And Steve can share that.
You have to give me a minute because I have to position this.
Yeah, he actually read from all 3 of his books. And at the end of tonight, you can hear some readings from the first 2 books, but Steve's got to forward up to 10 minutes into it so he can share the 3rd reading, which is Time Out. So it just takes him a minute to get that.
While they're waiting, just to let you know, I did finish that other short story. So,
Oh, great. What are you going to do with that?
well, probably in a collection. I may see if I can submit it somewhere, but take it to Writers Club first and see what they feel about it.
Yeah, so you want to say a word about your Writers Club? Is that something other people can join?
Springfield Writers Club meets twice a month. It's for anybody that's interested in writing. That's and all kinds of writing: poetry, nonfiction, novels, short stories, screenplays. So whatever somebody is interested in, and we basically go there and read some of the things that we've done, and we talk about markets and places to submit things that we have and get feedback. So if anybody is interested in any of that, you can let me know.
Okay, I've got it queued up.
Okay. You might put your email in the chat if you were interested in the writers group, and Sarah and Kevin can make sure you get that information. Okay, and the rest of us can mute ourselves. I know there was some extraneous noise from time to time, so I'm going to mute.
Time Out, an adventure in time travel. Wally Stevens stood for a moment in front of Ye Olde Bookshelf bookstore and found himself sighing, which surprised him a bit. Then he realized that very little surprised him, and that realization made him sigh again. It was apparently a morning of surprising revelations and deep sighs. Though he enjoyed his job as manager of the bookstore, it hit him that he was only 27 years old and already feeling like he was in a rut. He had no life outside of the bookstore, well, very little, and nothing he could call exciting. He needed something different to happen. But he also needed this job, so he sighed once more, no surprise this time, and opened the door. He glanced down at the ye old bookshelf mailbox, otherwise known as the old basket under ye old mail slot next to ye old front door. Wally almost remembered when he used to get excited about getting mail. Physical paper mail, rare as that concept may be to many people now. Mail that you could pick up and hold in your hands and take with you into another room. Yeah, mail used to be exciting. Back when people took time to write complete letters and send cards, and the mail was at least personally significant to you. But not much of that kind of writing anymore. Just some kind of quick, inane note online to tell you about what was happening during that brief, inane moment, to be immediately forgotten by the next more or less inane moment. This morning's mail, though, proved to be different. Among the ads and the requests for money, the Retired Bookbinders Association, he found 2 envelopes specifically addressed to him. Setting aside the obviously business or junk mail, he first picked the one with a personal return address. Maria Sharper sounded familiar. "Hi, Wally." Pretty casual beginning, he thought. "This is Maria Sharper from your high school class." Oh, yeah, perky cheerleader type, though he wasn't sure if she had actually been a cheerleader or not, but definitely perky. Not really his crowd in high school, as if he had a crowd. "I'm now Maria Carpenter, but I didn't think you might know me by my married name." No, he didn't think he'd been invited to that wedding. "Believe it or not, it's time for our 10th year high school reunion. Yay!" Yay. The letter went on to give a date and time and asked for him to RSVP ASAP with his +1. A +1. It had been a while since there had been a +1. He briefly wondered if his girlfriend from high school, Sheila McLean, was going and if she was going by herself. Wally shook his head. It didn't really matter because renewing that relationship was not a good idea. It was a terrible idea, and she would have emphatically agreed to that notion. Oh well, he thought to himself and put the invitation aside. The girl that always came to mind from high school, the prettiest girl in class, the most popular girl in class, the one he never dared approach or dream of talking to, was Cindy Connor. She still outshone anybody else he could think of asking. Wally sighed, once more if he was still counting. If she was at the reunion, he wouldn't pay attention to his +1 anyway. Maybe he just wouldn't go and would merely dream of what life would be like if he had only known then in high school what he knew now. He'd have been so much more polished and sophisticated and confident and whatever else he hadn't been then. Much more of something so that he could have at least spoken out loud to Cindy, something that wasn't a mumble. The other envelope came from a Dr. Vernon Sheffield in the Alphabet Building, downtown Oldsfield. Not too far away, but he wasn't familiar with that building. Possibly named after Jebediah Alphabet or something. Probably one of the original businessmen of Oldsfield. They had strange names then. "Mr. Stevens." Okay, a little bit more formal, but it didn't seem like a form letter. "Have you ever wished that you knew then what you know now?" He stopped reading and glanced back at the first envelope. Cindy.
Well, thank you, Kevin, for reading a little bit to whet people's appetite to read the rest of the book. So what would people like to have some dialogue with Kevin? Do you have some questions for him?
I do. I'm driving, so can you hear me?
Yes, we
Yes, I
can,
can hear
Crystal.
you.
Great. Kevin, how much discipline does it take for you to sit and write? Do you have a special time when you just dedicate to it, or do you write when it pleases you?
I usually prefer to write in the morning, and I sit down and I put up a little sign that says, "Do not talk, I'm writing." That's as far as the discipline, yes, it takes discipline. Normally, what I have to do is I have to reread a couple pages from what I've already written in order to get myself back into that world and back into that story. And then hopefully I stopped at a point that I sort of knew where I wanted to go the next step. And then write a little bit there and then try and stop again where I sort of know what I want to do with the next paragraph, the next chapter, so that I can give myself a starting point again when I do that. There have been times where I have sort of run into a roadblock, and it's sort of I've had to just stop and think, just where am I going with this? What do I want to have happen next? And it may be a few days before I can get back to it then. But it does take some discipline to sit down and actually get going. But normally it's because I want to know where the story's going. So I do want to get back to it. So thank you for that question, Crystal. Anybody else? I thought I saw another hand somewhere.
Yeah,
Mark?
I was going to ask you a very similar question, so I'm not going to belabor that. I just wondered if does Sue read the sign?
Sometimes. She's the one that actually made up the signs, but that sometimes she'll come in and interrupt, and then she'll go, "Oh, you have the sign up." You see her shaking her head, so.
Yeah, funny.
I would like to make a comment. Kevin, you briefly mentioned about a travel log on the Rhine River, and you had sent that to me, and I had put off reading it. When I finally got around to reading it, I realized it was titled something to the effect of how I barely survived my cruise. And I started reading it, and I expected just a regular travel log, and it was absolutely hilarious. It was really funny, and I really enjoyed it. And second, your book Time Out. I am going on a beach vacation in 3 weeks, and I plan on taking that on my beach vacation. That will be a good read right on the beach. I'm looking forward.
I'll believe it when I see it, Dave.
Well said. Well said. I'll also be bringing your second book to read on the beach too. Or if I get quarantined down there for 5 days and can't come back, then I'll have 2 books to read. That'd be great.
Mayor.
Thank you. And it was the Rhine River Run was the.
It was.
I'm glad you appreciated it.
It was very entertaining.
Dwight?
Hey, I don't know if somebody already asked this. I got kicked off the internet a minute ago, but how do you come up with the names for your characters?
There are a few characters that are actually named after people in the past, but only a very few. In Time Out, there's a girl that does a presentation in one of the college classes, and her name in the book is Dalik Holmes. When I met her, that's what I thought her name was. It was actually Dalik Combs, but I always liked the name Dalik Holmes, and I wanted to use it somewhere. Most of the time, it's just sort of a name that comes to me as I'm writing with it. It's not something that I go in planning. Every once in a while, I'll have a name that, okay, I think I want to put the character with this, but that's usually it's just as I'm doing it, the name pops into my head. So,
Hey, Kev, do you ever have a time that, or have you had a time in what you've written so far that you got to a certain point and said, wow, this just isn't going the way I wanted to, and you kind of back up and start over?
Well, on Time Out, one of the things that happened was I took a course through Antioch writing uh, courses a few years ago, and the chapter that I had started that book with, they liked the way I wrote, but they thought there wasn't enough introduction. So I actually added that first chapter where he's back at the bookstore to try and get him into it and why he actually went into the place to begin the time travel. So
Yeah,
that,
I imagine that's a big reset. They have to do something like that.
yeah, it took me a little while to get back to that point because I liked what I had done. But I did eventually understand what they were talking about and recognize something else needed to be there.
Kevin, do
Jim?
your characters ever take you someplace you did not expect to go?
Oh, yes. In The Body on the Roof, it's sort of, I started basically with the idea there's a body on the roof, and I started with the general outline that I wanted the investigation to last 3 days. And for each day, I wanted the focus to be on a different police officer. And that was about all I had to go by. And that's halfway through the book. For anybody that's read it, I ended up going a different direction on a lot of things. And I ended up with the bad guy at the end being different than who I started with. And that's just where the characters went. And that's in this book, Time Out. That's in the middle of this book. There's also a different direction that I go, which I was not planning on at all. But when I saw how the characters were working together, this is what needed to happen next. So yes, that happens, which is fun for me.
I hear that sometimes some authors plot out their whole book and they know exactly what's going to happen, but another way of writing is to just kind of let it happen. And then there are a lot of surprises for the author. It's kind of fun that
When
way.
I was much younger, I had read about doing outline for everything and all the characters that you had to put everything, have all their characters fully developed beforehand. And I did that, and then I didn't want to write that book because I already knew what was going to go on. So I never wrote it. That was a fantasy science fiction, but never got around to doing it.
Can you talk a little bit about the publishing process? How did you get your books published?
Well, my first book was self-published, and that's everything that I had read and everybody that I'd talked to said it's really hard to get a memoir, which is what Wecuss a little was, unless you're well known. Unless you're famous, and then somebody will publish it. So I just wanted to get it out there. And I went through Create Space, which was through Amazon. They had a self-publishing process. And there was a cost to it. And at that time, I thought, and Sue and I discussed it and says, well, we're willing to pay this much and consider it a hobby. If nothing really comes of it, but that I actually have a copy somewhere, we'll just consider it a hobby. And that's what I did. But actually, that one is done fairly well because it appears to be as if graduate students want to see it and people in the field want to read that. From that point, when I wrote the mystery, I wanted to get that with a publisher. I went through a writing coach, and I think you have had sort of the same one. I had Michael Giorgio, and you have Kathy Giorgio up in Minnesota. And that's once a week. I would meet with him by phone. I would send him a chapter or two, and we would go over that and review it. And then when we got done with that book, we put together a list of about 20 different publishers to try and submit to. And for each of them, it was different, like a 1-page resume or a 3-page or a 5-page resume or just a query letter. So you had to come up with something different for all of them. And did that, and I got maybe 5 or 6 responses, and Black Rose, publishing him with, was one that's basically said, yeah, we'll do your book. So right away, the others were sort of hemming and hawing or wanted me to pay part of it. But that's Black Rose says, we'll publish it. So went with them. And then on my third book, I wasn't even at the point of actually submitting it yet. And I got a letter from Black Rose saying, do you have another book for us? I was done with writing it. So I just sent it in to them and they said, yeah, looks good. So it helps, I think, once you have a publisher.
Well, thanks for explaining that. I thought some people might be interested. Are there any other questions for Kevin?
I know there's some people who aren't on video, so they're going to have to speak up if they want to ask a question. Well, maybe the interview handled all their answers. So,
Hey, Kevin, so is it getting easier or more difficult as you progress through this?
to write, to do the writing,
Yeah, exactly.
I think I have more of a sense, and I think I'm a better writer than when I started doing these, because I've gone through the editing process now for 3 books. And I think I know what I'm looking for in correcting things. But I think I have more of a sense of not necessarily exactly what's going to happen, but how I want the story to go than when I started.
So are you using a word processor? How do you do it? How do you get it down on paper or electrons?
Yeah, I do it a word processor. I do it through Word on my computer, which is much easier than when I used to have to do it by hand or by typewriter.
Yeah, for sure.
A lot easier to correct it and go, no, I want this word here. I want this comma here.
Kevin, do you have a favorite author or genre that you like to read?
Probably adventure, mysteries, along those lines. I had to read enough nonfiction going through school and actually for work that's not necessarily what I pursue now. If something of real interest to me, yes. But I like the Lee Child books. I like the Douglas Preston Lincoln Child books. So those right now, I'm reading one and I can't tell you the author because I never read him before, and it's a mystery set in 1929 with an English barrister. And I think it's just a very funny, interesting, well-written book. Oh, Sue's getting it for me. Skelton's Guide to Domestic Poisons by David Stafford. When I go to the library, I pick out books. Will try and pick out something from an author I'm familiar with, but I haven't read one of theirs. And then I also go, I'll pick out a book by an author whose name begins with A and a book whose author begins with a Z. And next time B and Y and so on, until I get back to the M's and then go back to the A and Z, because I want to try and introduce myself to new authors every time too. So I must have been at the S's when I picked that. Dave?
I have a question. When it comes to ideas for books, you've already written 3. Is that 3 ideas that you've gone through, or and like you might be running out of ideas, or does that just writing those books give you many, many more ideas as to?
Well, there's many more. I'm a couple chapters, and that's as far as I've gotten into another mystery set in Summerfield, which is what The Body on the Roof was. But I've got, in this big stack of things, almost all of these hold a lot of different ideas that I will jot down.
Okay.
And
Does writing the books help you come up with additional ideas? Or are these just ideas you would have had even if you hadn't written any books?
No, the short story that I shared before that I wrote, Guardian Angels, did give me an idea for another short story that I'm working on now.
Okay.
It's a little bit more serious than what I would normally write, but it was a story I wanted to get down, and then, yeah, it did give me an idea for another one.
Okay. I kind of figured that there might be some self-propagating going on here when it comes to ideas. It's not like it's a glass where when it's empty, well, you're out of ideas. It's like it keeps on refilling itself.
No, I keep getting things from Writer's Digest. You need writing prompts, and it's sort of, no, I don't need the prompts. I know I got enough ideas.
Great.
We maybe have time for one more question. Maybe have one more.
Kevin,
Yes, Sarah?
hi. I was just wondering, does Sue edit your books? Is she the first one to read them?
She usually doesn't want to do it till I've completed it, and I'll give her a copy of that and see what her reaction is to it. The short story Guardian Angels, yes, there's a major change that she felt was necessary and part of that, and she was right. She knew more about that area than I did, so.
So she was a help.
Yes. Yeah, I have a pregnant woman in that story. And
That was good.
Now we'd like to turn it back to our community engagement librarian, Sarah Webb. She's going to tell us about the upcoming programs.
Yes, let me share this with you.
I'm gonna leave it now.
Get this. Okay, so our next local author spotlight is Nancy Flinchball. This is happening on Thursday, February 24th at 7 p.m. on Zoom. We'll be sending you all the link to this program. So that is our next local author spotlight for you. We also have our very first local author club with Mr. Kevin Creager and his book Time Out. And that will be taking place in person at the main library Geyer Room on Tuesday, March 8th at 6:30 p.m. And as Nancy said, we have several copies of Kevin's book. Come in, feel free to check one out and join us for our first ever local author book club. I also want to remind you that our program tonight is being recorded and it will be posted up on the library's YouTube channel. If you go to our website, ccplohio.org, click on the videos button, it will take you to the YouTube channel where you'll get to view tonight's program at a later date. Also, I'm going to send everyone an email with a link for a short survey. If you could fill this out, just take a few moments, that would be awesome. And if you have any questions for me, feel free to contact me at sweb@ccplohio.org. Thank you.
Well, we want to thank all of you for coming, and we're excited and congratulate Kevin for his most recent book and for all of the books he's written. And we'll look forward to hearing what you're doing in the future. And before we close tonight, give Kevin a chance to say goodbye if he'd like to, and then we're going to hear the readings from his first two books. So Kevin, would you like to say goodbye?
Well, first of all, thank you so much, Nancy and Sarah, for putting this together. And I really appreciate the opportunity.
You're welcome.
And I'm very grateful to have been the first one called to do this. And thank everybody else for coming out on this. For us, anyway, it's a cold winter's night. In California, maybe not. We've got snow on the ground, but I've enjoyed spending the time here. I've enjoyed doing the interview and the readings, and I think this is a wonderful program and very much appreciate all the support that I see in front of us. So thank you.
Well, thank you, Kevin, for participating. It was fun to interview you and read your book. We also want to mention that Farzana Dada, her pen name is Farzana Moon, is on the call tonight, and she's going to be featured in April with her book, American Queen. which is about an American Sufi or American woman who married a Sufi. It's very
Farzana, do you
interesting.
want to put your hand up so people know? There you are.
Well, thanks again. And Steve, if you could cue up Kevin's other readings.
Wecuss a little. The life and times of a school psychologist. Crisis response, the beginnings. If I cannot bring you comfort, then at least I bring you hope. That line is from a song from the movie Toys. No, not Toy Story or The Toy. This movie starred Robin Williams. He inherited a toy factory, ran it to make fun, not money, and he had to battle an uncle who wanted to use it to make military weapons. It did have great music, and this song was about starting a new year. This line has always had special meaning for me as a school psychologist, particularly when working with crisis or traumatic situations. My role has not been to solve the problems directly right then and there, but to provide hope that the problem can eventually be resolved, that the situation can get better someday. If there has been a death or a loss, or if anything bad has happened, I can't make you feel better now. None of us can. One day there was a fire in the apartment of a first grader, Sherry. Instead of running out, she hid under her bed and was found unconscious from smoke asphyxiation. She was not expected to survive, but we weren't ready for the class to hear that yet. I met with the class. We talked about how ill Sherry was, how she might not be back, and we drew cards for her and her family. One of the boys, Damien, did not want to participate. It took several prompts, but he finally burst out angrily. How come nobody talked with us when my cousin died? Turned out his cousin, much older, had been killed in another city, but it was a trauma that had impacted his family, and to him, the school had not cared. Damien and I later had a talk of our own, but we hadn't known about it in the first place. Sometimes we miss so many family traumas that we either don't know about or we don't have a sense of how the incidents affect the kids. So we frequently end up medicating or labeling the child, addressing the symptoms, not the problem. I was in a Friday afternoon psychologist meeting when I got a call at about 2:45 to hurry out to the school. An aunt had just come into the building and informed the principal that Sherry had died. Because it was Friday, we did not want the students to not be informed for the whole weekend or to hear it through word of mouth. That is the most common and most inaccurate way for information about tragedies to be passed. The class was held over so that I could get there, and parents who were waiting to pick up their children were asked to come into the room. The teacher and I told them, and we said that we would meet first thing Monday morning with the class and have counselors available for the rest of the school that day. I then went to a school staff meeting and we worked out what to do for Monday. We had anticipated this happening from Sherry's condition, and we felt we were ahead of the game. Perhaps too far ahead. The Saturday morning paper reported that Sherry was still on life support, and the parent had not yet made the decision to take her off. The aunt knew the decision had been given to the parent to remove the life support and wanted to let the school know as soon as possible. But she left out the fact that the decision had not yet been made. The school then wanted to get the information to her classmates and their parents as quickly as possible before the weekend, and gossip began. But Sherry was still alive. She was taken off life support by Saturday afternoon and died soon after. We were prepared for Monday and went ahead with our plans. And on our district crisis plans, we immediately put confirm information as the number one step in each scenario. The body on the roof, a small town mystery. Summerfield, Ohio, 30-some years ago, give or take a lifetime. The call came in just after 8 in the morning. A wet, dreary morning following a major thunderstorm that lasted most of the night. Still overcast, still dripping, a good morning to do paperwork. For somebody maybe, but not for Jeff Pearson, the chief of police for Summerfield. Pearson was in his early 40s and still in what could be considered good physical condition, but mornings, and particularly wet mornings, made it hard to get motivated. A body had been found. What that meant, heaven only knew, but Pearson knew he was the one that needed to find out. When first given the address, he immediately recognized it and quietly asked, "Mrs. Matheson?" Marie Hazlett, the dispatcher, grimaced and shrugged with an equally soft, "Could be, but that's all I got. A body on a roof." "Well, she's a widow. Wouldn't think there'd be anybody else's body on her roof," he sighed. The police department consisted of Hazlett's desk behind a counter facing the main door, an open area behind her with a small table, and 4 two-walled open cubicles. Pearson shrugged into his jacket and headed out a back door for the squad car parked behind the police station. All the downtown businesses circled the park with its bandstand trees and grassy areas. Coming out of the parking lot and turning left to head north around the green, he had no difficulties in figuring out where to go. He, as well as most of the rest of the force, had been there before. Mrs. Matheson's was toward the edge of town, but it didn't take him long to get to her home. Everything in Summerfield was within 15 minutes of everything else at rush hour. 2 of his officers were already there. Stephanie Reisner, his nominal second in command, and Martin Adams, still considered a rookie, though he had been with them nearly a year. Neighbors were starting to gather and drapes were drawn open across the street to stare at the law, as there wasn't much of anything else to look at yet. It was still too early for all the houses to be awake, but 2 men with jogging outfits were talking to Adams. As Pearson rose from the car, zipping up his jacket, Reisner, trim and with the energy of the late 20s, moved toward him. He peered at the gray sky, still slightly leaking. "A mite cold and damp out here. Morning, Speed." Pearson had nicknames for everyone. Reisner ran track in college and was certainly, still the fastest in his department. "Morning, Chief." If his officers had nicknames for him, they made sure he didn't hear them. "What do we have here?" "Hazy just said a body on a roof." "Come over here to this corner. You can't see it from the street because of the overhanging tree branches. Tim Woods and Hal Pushkin's there with Bud. We're out running this morning and glimpsed it only from the angle 2 houses down. They had to come closer to the house before they could tell it was really something. It's a body. And that's what I've heard." They sloshed across the sodden lawn to the west corner of the house. She pointed up, and now he could see the body on the roof. Or what they could actually see was the bottom half of a body wedged behind a heating vent, half hidden under some low-lying branches. It was hard to tell who it was, but it appeared female. Pearson squinted. "Well, it looks like it could be Mrs. Matheson. It's her house. We've sent for the fire department to get a ladder to get up there. There's a ladder around back, but we can't get to the body because of the chimney and those branches from that side." She looked at Pearson. "And I didn't want to move the ladder in case," Pearson raised an eyebrow, "in case we needed to look for evidence." "For evidence? You think we have a crime here, officer? Nobody kills anybody in this town. The most serious crimes we've got are shoplifting candy bars by teenagers." "It is a body on a roof, sir." "You're aware that Mrs. Matheson calls us or the fire department at least once a month to get her cat off her roof, and possibly sometimes does it herself in between." He let his eyes roam the rest of the roof. "There, you see that just at the corner of the chimney? There's Reginald now." He turned back to Reisner. She probably thought she could handle it herself again this time, to keep somebody else from coming out in the bad weather. It is a body on a roof, sir, and it was a bad storm last night. I can't see her going out for her cat in that. Pearson slowly nodded. You may be right, Speed. I just hope she hasn't been lying up there, not dead, just unconscious, waiting for us to get another ladder.
Well, thank you all for coming, and that probably whets your appetite to read Kevin's other two books. So thank you, everybody. Special thanks to Steve Schlather, who's been our technical support tonight. We appreciate your time. And
Yes, thanks everyone so much for coming, and we hope you'll join us for our next local author spotlight on February 24th. Have a wonderful evening.
good night.
Thank you very much.
Thank you for
Thanks, everybody. Appreciate the program. Thanks, Kevin.